Alright, so welcome back to Underwater Cities. So the last video was mostly an overview, talking about the components and a couple other things. For this video, let's start with talking about the player boards that you'll be starting with, that you'll be playing with. Okay? So, first of all, this is going to be your starting city. Every player will start with one of these domes, and they'll always start here in this corner here on the right. You'll notice there are little circles next to it. There are little circles next to all of these areas where these bigger city domes are going to go. These little areas here are where your different little structures, either the kelp farm, the desalination plant, or the laboratory, they can go in these three areas here, and each city will have them, okay? Each city has at least three. This one has, it looks like 5. That one's got 4. Then you'll notice this one here and this one look totally different from this one and this one, for instance. They sort of have a dotted line around them, and these have a straight line around them. It's a full color, right? So these little dotted line circles are only if a card says you can put it in these particular areas. These are considered basically restricted areas, so you can't put anything here unless basically you get a card that basically says you can put it in this restricted area, or in a restricted area. So there's one right there as well. There's another one here, for instance. There's one of those there, one of those there. Now, that does not mean that these dotted lines, these here are not restricted. These are where your tunnels are going to go. So you're going to put tunnels in these locations here, building them as you go along. Now, the cool thing about building in this game is you do not have to basically, you can actually build a city adjacent to another city, even though there isn't a tunnel connecting them. Okay? You can build the tunnel first if you want to, before building the city, but you can build the city before the tunnel gets built. Okay? That's what you're allowed to do. However, this is adjacent to this city. So if I was to build the city dome over here, that is not adjacent to this city here. Neither this is, because it's connected with these two tunnels here. This would be considered adjacent to that because of these two tunnels here. But in order to connect this city to this city here, you would have to have not one, but 2 tunnels connecting it. That's how that would work. You would need 2 tunnels to connect this city to that city, okay? Now, if you have multiple cities on your player board, and this one over here isn't considered connected to this one, during the production phase, when you have to start feeding your citizens, only this one will count, because the first one is always counted as connected, while the rest will have to be connected via a tunnel that you've built. So if you have a city over here, or for instance over here for that matter, and it doesn't know how to have a tunnel connecting it to this city, then there are technically no people in this city anyways, and therefore you won't have to feed them kelp in order to continue on, in order to not lose victory points, etc., etc. So that is something cool to note, that you don't have to worry about paying the extra kelp fee, if you will, if you have a city that isn't connected. But you're going to want them to be connected, because during the production phase, you're going to get resources and money based on everything that you have that is connected, okay? So if you don't have a city that is connected, you're not going to get the resources for that city. So that is something to note. Now, another thing that is also allowed, you could, for instance, build a laboratory over here in this location. It's still technically connected. I mean, it's still technically adjacent to this city, but it isn't connected. So if you have this laboratory over here, you won't get the resources for it because it isn't connected, okay? The only way that this laboratory will be connected is if you have a tunnel and a city over here. They will all have to be like so to be, in order to connect them. This will have to be what it looks like if you're going to connect them all. So if you have, for instance, just the tunnel, that's not connected. If you have just the dome, that's not connected. You need to have both in order to connect them to get your valuable resources during the production phase. But it will allow you some freedom of building, at least somewhat, in areas nearby if you're running out of space over here. Now, the reason why you might want to build a laboratory all the way over there, first of all, is because, as you see, there are only 3 slots here, and even though you could technically have one of each of the 3 structures that can go in these tiny little things, you might not want to do that because cards and certain things, and even during the production phase, will reward you if you have upgraded, basically, facilities of the same kind. So you'll get a ton of points, or should I say, you'll get a ton of resources if you had basically 2 of these kelp farms here upgraded. They were upgraded like that because there was 2 discs on them. They're upgraded, and you have 2 of them right next to each other like this. You're going to get a decent amount of resources. But if you had like an upgraded one, but you had them in 2 different areas, for instance, this one's all the way over here, you're not going to get as many resources because they're not right next to each other. So obviously there is some strategy in planning ahead, and obviously building, maybe it would be prudent to build a laboratory all the way out there, so that way you can have 2 of something next to each other over here in the meantime. So that's something to note, that's something you can do and build. Now you'll notice on the player board there are some resources here in certain spots. When you build a tunnel in this location, you will automatically move up your marker on the board up 1 space on the Federation tract. Okay, that's cool. If you go here, if you build something right here, so if I was to put this laboratory right here, after building it, I would get 1 plasteel as a bonus, as a benefit for putting it there. It's an instant bonus. If I put a tunnel right here, I'd get 1 kelp, and so on. You get the point. There's a lot of things going on. Some of these will even affect what you get during the production phase as well, if you have a building there built. So obviously there's some benefits to branching out and connecting buildings and building things. You'll get some resources back building occasionally. And another thing you'll note, that there are metropolises on these islands here. If you connect your tunnel system, if it's all the way connected over to here, then this metropolis is going to give you some extra stuff. Okay, this one here in particular is going to give some points during each production phase, and it's going to give you an instant bonus of 1 card and 1 plasteel. Okay, so you'll get benefits at some of these other locations. Some are just an instant benefit, while others are going to do something during the production and give you an instant benefit. So that's kind of a nice little bonus to note about the player board. Now, how do you build these structures? What resources do you need to build them? So let's talk about that next. So first of all, let's go over this handy little, basically, giant player aid, if you will, that will help you figure out what you're going to need in order to build stuff. So this is the player aid I'm talking about. So you'll notice this green one here is a kelp, obviously for kelp, right? It's a kelp farm. And then this is the desalination plant. This white one is the laboratory. And then obviously that is definitely the tunnel, okay? So in order to build a kelp farm, you will pay 1 kelp to build one. In order to build a desalination plant, you'll need a credit to build one. In order to build the laboratory, you're going to have to pay 1 plasteel to do so. In order to build the tunnel, you'll need a plasteel and you'll need 1 credit. Then these are the cities. This is the non-symbiotic city, and this is the symbiotic city. To build a symbiotic city, you'll need 2 plasteel, 1 kelp, and 1 credit. In order to build a symbiotic city over here, these purplish, reddish ones, you'll need 1 biomatter, which is hard to obtain, 1 plasteel, 1 kelp, and 2 credits. Now, this symbol here indicates upgrade. Now, in order to build these buildings, in order to upgrade your buildings, you can't just simply on your turn decide, ooh, I'm just going to build this. ooh, I'm just going to build this because I have the resources. That's not how this game works. You have to go to a certain location on the board that will indicate that you are allowed to use that action to build said building, to build said city, to upgrade said structure, etc., etc. So you're going to need to do those things in order to do it. So sometimes you may not necessarily always be able to get to do this stuff, even though you have the resources to do so. Now, if you see this symbol, it means upgrades. So there are some locations and cards that will allow you to build buildings and upgrade buildings. There are cards that will let you do it. And so when you upgrade, you're going to get some bonuses for upgrading and building stuff. Now, in order to upgrade, you'll have to pay resources based on the card, what the card says, or where the action space on the board says. You'll have to pay the corresponding resources, but this is going to indicate that you're going to get a bonus during the production phase if you have an upgraded kelp farm. It's going to indicate how much stuff you're going to get, or even if you don't have an upgraded kelp farm, it's going to indicate what you produce during the production phase. So for every connected kelp farm you have that isn't upgraded, you're going to get 1 kelp. For every upgraded kelp farm you have, you're going to get 1 kelp, and you're going to get a victory point as well for an upgraded kelp farm. Now over here, you'll notice there are 2 kelp farms next to each other, 2 salination plants next to each other, and 2 laboratories next to each other, okay? These have to be connected to a city, and they have to be 2 of them right next to each other, and they have to be upgraded. So if you want this bonus, which is 3 kelp and 3 victory points, you need to have 2 kelp farms that are upgraded and connected in the same city, right next to each other, okay? That's how that's going to work. So if you have 2 of these, but they're in different cities, for instance, you're not going to get this bonus. You're instead going to get this bonus for each one of them you have. So not nearly as much, obviously. Now for the desalination plant, the benefit you're going to get for having one of these in your underwater cities is you're going to get a credit during the production phase for each desalination plant you have. If you have an upgraded desalination plant, you're going to get 1 credit and 1 biomatter. So that might be something to go for if you're needing biomatter. Now, if you manage to get 2 desalination plants connected in the same city, then obviously you're going to get 3 credits and 2 biomatter. That's pretty cool for every one. So if you had 2 cities that had 2 desalination plants in each of them, you'd get this benefit for both separate cities. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so the laboratory, now it may be different. To build the laboratory may cost you a plasteel, but it's not going to produce a plasteel for the production phase. It's going to instead produce 1 science resource as your production phase benefit for having a laboratory, okay? If you have an upgraded laboratory, however, you'll get 1 science and 1 plasteel. So the only way you're going to get plasteel from a laboratory is, unless you have a card that says otherwise, is if you have it upgraded in the first place. Then you'll get 1 science and 1 plasteel. And if you have 2 laboratories that are upgraded, connected in the same city, then you'll get 3 plasteel and 2 science resources. Pretty awesome. Now, you're probably thinking, do you get anything for the tunnels? Yes, you do. You do get a benefit. You'll get 1 credit for every tunnel you have that's connected. So as long as you've built a tunnel and then built another tunnel that's adjacent to that tunnel, well, that's connected. So you'd have 2 tunnels right there. That means you'd get a couple of credits for having a couple of tunnels in your player board, okay? If you have an upgraded tunnel, and it can only be upgraded once, and for that matter, not only can these things only be upgraded once, but these all have to be next to each other, and there is no additional benefit for the tunnels. But if you do have an upgraded tunnel, then you're going to get 1 credit and 1 victory point during the production phase. That's pretty nifty. Now, obviously, you're going to want to obviously get these cities built in your civilization, because there is no way to upgrade a city, for one thing, okay? And so therefore you're not really going to get any benefit here for having a city in your civilization. But if you have if you have a symbiotic city, then you'll get 2 victory points for every symbiotic city in your civilization, okay? During the production phase, that's what's going to happen. So that's how that's going to work. So you're definitely going to want lots of resources. You're definitely going to want lots of building structures before you reach that production phase. Because you're always, in this game, one thing I've noticed about playing this game is the first few rounds of this game are the hardest because you have very limited resources, and it seems like you're not really collecting a lot of resources. So you're basically just getting by collecting resources. And so you definitely want to try to build as many buildings as you can, maybe not necessarily cities, but you're going to want to build some of these, maybe get one of these out, so that way you'll get a nice benefit during the production phase, and then you'll be ready for the next era and have tons of resources to build a bunch more stuff in your civilization, okay? But that's basically how the player board works, how you're going to build buildings, and that kind of stuff. Now, in the next video, let's talk about each of the different locations you can go on the board and how that's all going to work and what you can do with them. And we'll talk about that in the next video.